We are learning the second Sikha of Parshas Balak in Chelek Yud Ches, page 271. What is Mashiach all about? What's the Geula all about? This is the fundamental Sikha where the Rebbe discusses the inyan of Mashiach and Geula from the standpoint of Halacha, according to the Rambam. This is a very special Sikha where the Rebbe will explain the Rambam in Hilchos Malachim, the whole arichis of the Lashon Rambam, and show us what the inyan of Mashiach and Geula is al pi halacha. This is also a sikha that the Rebbe gave out to Anoshim, Noshim V'Taf. The Dvar Malchus that the Rebbe gave out had 4 sikhas in it. This is the first of the 4 sikhas that, of course, the Rebbe gave out al manas to learn. The Rebbe then demanded that we should set aside time to learn in Yonei Geula Mashiach. So this is the first fundamental sikha on this subject. So let's begin. In Saif Hilchos Malachim wo es retzich wegen Melech HaMashiach sagt der Rambam. At the end of Hilchos Malachim, where the Rambam speaks about Mashiach, so he writes as follows: V'zel Hashoyne V'chol mi she'einem maime boi oy mi she'einem machake lebi yosei. One who does not believe in Mashiach, or he does not await his coming. Not only is he denying all other Nevi'im, where it clearly speaks about Mashiach, he's also denying Teira and Moshe Rabbeinu himself. Teira testifies about Mashiach. As it says in the Pasuk, the Pasuk in Parshas Nitzavim, where it speaks about the Geula. The Rambam continues. After Parshas Bilam Nemar and Parshas Bilam, it says, Visham niva b'shnei Mashiachim, and he prophesies about 2 Mashiachim. B'Mashiach Rishon shehu David sheishias Yisrael miyatzareim. The first Mashiach is David HaMelech, that helped Yidden from all their enemies. U'b'Mashiach ha'achrein she'omed mibanav she'mashiach Yisrael ba'achreina. And the final Mashiach that will come to save Yidden in the end of all times. V'shamu Aimer, and the Pasuk says, Ar enu v'loy ata. I see him and it's not now. Zeh David. That is referring to David HaMelech. Ashurenu v'loy karev. I view him and he's not near. Zeh Melech HaMashiach. That refers to Mashiach. The next Pasuk, Dorach koichav mi Yaakov. There's a star that shot out of Yaakov. Zeh David. Refers to David HaMelech. V'kom shevet mi Yisrael, a rod or a leader will stand up amongst Yidden. Zeh HaMelech HaMashiach. Umachatz pasi Moav, and he will smash and he will crush the extremities of Moav. Zeh David. That's David HaMelech. V'cheinu oime, and another pasuk it says, Vayach es Moav, vayamadedem bechevel. V'karker kol b'nei Sheis, and he will undermine all the children of Sheis. Zeh HaMelech HaMashiach, referring to Mashiach, shenema bayu mashloi miyam ad yam. He'll rule from sea to sea. The next pasuk says, "V'haya Edom Yereisha Zeh David." Edom will be an inheritance for Yidden. That's David HaMelech. Shenema v'tihi Edom leDavid la'avodim v'geimer. V'haya Yereisha Seir Oivav Zeh HaMelech HaMashiach. Shenemar v'olam Meshim Artziyim v'geimer. So this is the conclusion of the psukim, many psukim here, mainly from Parshas Bilam or Balak, that the Rambam brings to show that the subject of Mashiach is already prophesied in the Torah. The Sefer Hayad is the Sefer von Halachos. The Rambam in the Sefer Hayad is a Sefer of Halachos. Kedivrei Rambam v'akdamase b'Sefer, as the Rambam says towards the end of his introduction. Nit von drashes of Psuki HaTorah v'chayetze b'zeh. It's not a Sefer of drashes explaining the Psukim in Torah. Darf man verstehen? If so, the obvious question here is, zu herausbringen die Reihe zu der Halacha. As kol mi she'einem baimen bei chulu. Is it a kefer b'Torah v'Moshe Rabbeinu to make the point that if one doesn't believe in Mashiach, he's denying what it says in the Torah and through Moshe Rabbeinu, v'ld gewen genug wenn sagt bloß af bepashes bilam nema v'sham niba b'Mashiach ha'achrein she'emed b'banav she'mashiach Yisrael ba'achreina. It would be enough for the Rambam to say, take a look in Parshas Bilam, and you'll see there it speaks about Mashiach that will take Yidden out of Galus. Und wir wollten schon allein gewusst, als redt wegen der Psukim von der Nevuah, was onoib is, asher yasa mazel amcha ba'achres hayamim. That the Rambam is referring to those psukim towards the end of the Nevuah of Bilam, where it speaks about what will happen to your nation at the end of all times. It says, ba'achres hayamim. Favos is a meirech in the Protei Arayis, as in die Ksuvim redt sich wegen Shnei HaMashiachim, Why does the Rambam speak about the fact that there are actually two Mashiachim? And also goes through all the psukim here, explaining exactly the details, each pasuk, who it refers to. So all of this is extra. It's almost like the Rambam turned into a Rashi, a Latayra, where he describes and explains the psukim. Even if the Rambam wants to point you to exactly which psukim he's referring to when he says that in Parshas Bilam it speaks about Mashiach. It would be enough if the Rambam would bring the beginning and the end. As das ist gesagt geworden in die Psukim, Arenu v'loyata v'goyme, v'haya yeresha seir oivav goyme. Starting from the pasuk Arenu, concluding with the pasuk v'haya yeresha seir oivav. Why does the Rambam go through all the Psukim in detail, explaining exactly what each detail in the pasuk is talking about? Von dem was the Rambam is moisif der Raya af beparshas Bilam Nemar. Now, from the very fact that the Rambam even brings up this Raya from Parshas Bilam, even though Chot Hashem frie gebracht the Raya of the Metzemin, Shariat Teira Ida Olav Shanema V'Shav Hashem Lekechas Shvuscha. The Rambam already brought a Raya for the union of the Geula that it's written about in Parshas Nitzavim. It's mashma, so it seems, und wie es ist verstandig von Parshas L'Shoinei. This is what's understood from the words of the Rambam, as the Psukim from Parshas Bilam bringt der Rambam be'iker nicht nur als Reihe auf etzem Bias HaMashiach, dem Auslesen Yidden von Golus. The Rambam is not bringing these Psukim of Parshas Bilam as a proof for the coming of Mashiach, for the actual redemption itself, nor euch as niba b'shnei HaMashiachim b'Mashiach HaRishon shu David chulu u'b'Mashiach HaAchron shu Omed Bibanov. But to prove that there's a nevuah about Mashiach himself. And actually two Mashiachim. The first Mashiach, David HaMelech, and the final Mashiach that will come from his descendants. Was the Fathers and Mefaret to Mefarish the Psukim via Zayis is Mochach as Niba b'Shnei HaMashiachim. And therefore the Rambam is bringing these Psukim here of Parshas Bilam specifically because the point is not just to say that there'll be a Geula and then there'll be Bias HaMashiach, but that there'll be a person, Mashiach. The Mashiach Rishon and the Mashiach Achron that we can see in the Pasuk. Now when you look into the Pasuk itself, you don't necessarily see it. It just says, Arenu v'lo yata, Sharenu v'lo karev. Therefore, the Rambam is coming to spell out that what the Torah is speaking about is the person Mashiach, or the two Mashiachim. That's the addition of why the Rambam brings up over here, Parshas Bilam. So that would seemingly explain why the Rambam is explaining these psukim and not just pointing out where in Parshas Bilam you find that it speaks about Mashiach and the Geula. However, this itself needs an additional clarification. So yes, the very fact that the Rambam brings these psukim of Parshas Bilam, more than just the subject of Mashiach that he already quoted before from Parshas Nitzavim Yeshloima, we can say simple. While in the pasuk V'shav Hashem Lekecha Shvuscha steht nicht, as das wird sein durch Mashiach. There it doesn't say that the Eibusha will return the captives through Mashiach. The Rebbe bringt der Reihe von einem Mefurish B'Teira as Niba of Melech HaMashiach. That here, these are the psukim where you see that there'll be a person Melech HaMashiach. But the question is, was in the Geya zu the Rayas von HaTeira of Bias HaMashiach as Sham Niba nicht nur wegen Mashiach HaAchron, nor euch wegen David, Mashiach HaRishon? Why is it relevant here to say that in these psukim it speaks not only about the final Mashiach, but also about David HaMelech, the first Mashiach? Ubefrat noch mit Nariches und Mefarish sein alle Prote alle Schönes in die Psukim, welche von sie meinen den Melech David und welche der Melech HaMashiach. And to go through in detail each one of the Psukim and to explain which one of them referred to David HaMelech and which one referred to Mashiach. So the answer that we're saying here, that the Rambam is bringing up Parshas Bilam to show you that the Torah speaks about Mashiach himself, is not an adequate explanation to understand why the Rambam is going through all these psukim in great detail, and especially speaking about David HaMelech. L'chayri Yeshleima, the Rebbe continues, so seemingly we can explain as follows. As the time was the Rambam bringt der Reihe euch von dem as Niba b'shnei HaMashiachim. Euch wegen Mashiach HaRishon shu David she'shias Yisrael chulu. So the Rambam brings a Reihe about two Mashiachim, including the first Mashiach, which is David HaMelech. So again, the L'chayre was in the Gehe zu der Munne in Bias HaMashiach, as euch David wird angerufen Mashiach, Punkt wie Melech HaMashiach. Why is it necessary for what the Rambam is speaking over here about Mashiach and about our Emunah Mashiach, that there was a previous personality that was by Yidden, and he as well is called a Mashiach, just like Mashiach, just like Melech HaMashiach. Biz as of Zay Beide Zokmen B'Shnei HaMashiachim Mit HaHei HaYediyah. Both of them are referred to as the Mashiach. Just like Melech HaMashiach, David HaMelech is also called HaMashiach. So why is it necessary? In other words, the Rebbe is pointing out of here another detail, that it's not only that the Rambam is bringing up David HaMelech and the drashas of the Psukim, but the title that he's giving, that is Mashiach Rishon and Mashiach Achrein, that David HaMelech is also referred to as Mashiach. So there's a point that we can say that Rambam is trying to make with this. Is weil das is negeya u'machazik the emunah in bias Mashiach. This is relevant and this strengthens our emunah in Mashiach. How? So the Rebbe says in two ways. Number one, wissendig as der inyan from Mashiach is nit kenaya zach. When we see and we know that Mashiach, which will come and redeem us in the future, is not something new. Was es schon gewend, the Mashiach harishon shu David sheishes Yisrael miyatzereim. Klal Yisrael once had before a Mashiach that came and it saved Yidden from all their enemies. Git das suat teikif in der emunah as euch le'asid that come a Mashiach shemashiach es Yisrael. So this adds a strength to the belief that Yidden have that if we see that Klal Yisrael already experienced a Mashiach that came amongst them to save them, so this will happen again. A Mashiach will come and save Yidden. Al derech wieder a chacha von Chazal of Tchias HaMeisim. This can be compared to the expression the Gemara says to prove the idea of the Eibishter being able to make Tchias HaMeisim. D'loi have chaya, da have chaya lekol shekein. If someone that's not born yet, that doesn't exist yet, so the Eibishter brings him to be alive, someone that was alive already, and he passed away. So obviously the Eibishter has the power to bring him back to Tchias HaMeisim. So same thing over here. If we see that in the past in history there was a Mashiach once, so it's much easier to believe that Mashiach will come again and take us out of Galus. Or we can explain this a little bit differently. Wie Mefarshim sind in Masber, as Mefarshim say this. Wie bald as Shnei HaMashiachim sind gesagt geworden in demselben Nevuah. Since over here both Mashiachim are being prophesied in the very same prophecy of Bilam. Es Punkt wie es ist Mekuyim. Der Chelek HaNevuah b'negei the Mashiach Harishon shehu David sheishes Yisrael miyat Sereim. So just like the first half of the prophecy was fulfilled and David HaMelech came and he saved Yidden from their enemies, azoi vet zichim mekuyim werden the Nevuah wegen Mashiach ha'achrein she'omed mibanav she'Mashiach Yisrael ba'achreina. So too we are assured that it will happen again and Mashiach will come and will redeem us now as well. That's why the Rambam brings up the Shnei Mashiachim, basically to strengthen our emunah in Mashiach. Es ist aber move on, however, it's understood, as es schwer zu lernen, and das ist the ganze Tam. Difficult to say that this is the only reason why the Rambam brings all these psukim. Warum mit die Psukim ist der Rambam kepashtus l'shainoi nit eisen zu bringen a Reihe und Heichache as Melech HaMashiach wird sicher kommen. In the simple language of the Rambam, the reason why he's bringing these Psukim is not because he wants to assure you and guarantee you that from all these Psukim we can see that Mashiach will definitely come and therefore you should believe in him. Nor the main objective of what the Rambam is saying here is as ein Kumen is azach was steht in der Teire. The Rambam is bringing the proofs for the fact that it's written in Teire. And based on this, he's coming to explain, as there was eine maimen boy, oi misheine machaken lebi yasai, is lei b'shar neviim bulvado kefer, el beteire o b'meisher rabbeinu. The main point of the Rambam is to prove this halacha that he just said, that if you don't believe in Mashiach, you're a kefer in Teire and a Meisher Rabbeinu. So where is it written in Teire? So he's bringing you the psukim where it's written. That's the main objective of the Rambam here. Haint if so, the question comes back, was is dan geya as niba b'shnei HaMashiachim? Why is it relevant here for this, to prove that Mashiach is written in the Torah, to tell us that there are two Mashiachim, Oich b'Mashiach Harishon shehu David, including the first Mashiach David, or befrat, noch zum Befarish sein, the fear, doppelte L'shainis von the Psukim, and especially, as we said before, to explain all four Psukim that have the double expressions that they refer to David and Mashiach. As mit der erste wird gemeint der Mashiach Rishon, und der zweite Mashiach Achron. So we're back to our basic question here that the whole arichis in the lashon of the Rambam seems to be unnecessary for a sefer halachis like the Rambam. Zok der Rambam, aber in a besondere halacha. Continuing, the Rambam says, but this is in a separate halacha, that af ba'arei miklat hu aimer. So too, the Rambam adds that there's another place where I find a raya for this. Because the pasuk there says, by arei miklat, im yarchiv avayel lekechas gvulcha v'yisafta lacha oit shalish arim v'goyme. If the Eibusher will broaden your territory, so you'll add another 3 cities for the ir miklat. Umeyaylam lehoya davazeh. This is something that never occurred in the past. And the mitzvah of the Eibusher is not for nothing. So it must be that this is an indication that this yarchiv will happen when Mashiach comes. So the Rebbe points out about this halacha. It says, Yedua as oich di chalukas halachis in Rambam is b'diuk. It's known that even the division of each halacha in the Rambam is also precise. So davon verstehen, the question here is, was bringt der Rambam der Reihe in a halacha b'fnei atzmai und nicht in the friedige halacha zusammen mit die andere 2 Rayes min ha-Torah? Why does the Rambam bring this Reihe, the 3rd Reihe, separately from the other 2 Rayes that he did bring together? Und oibs is massem, as jede Reihe soll stehen in a besondere halacha. And if it deserves a separate halacha for each raya that the Rambam brings, hat euch die Reihe von Parshas Bilam gedarf sagen in a besondere halacha. So if that's the case, the Rambam should bring Parshas Nitzavim in one halacha, Parshas Bilam or Balak in another halacha, and then Parshas Shoftim, where it speaks about Arei Miklat in a 3rd halacha. So why only Arei Miklat is in a separate halacha? Oich, another detail here. Pavas is a medayik zu mitzayin sein, der Mokke vom Pasuk. Why does the Rambam here tell us the source where this is? Befrat mit dem Loschen af ba'arei miklat. And specifically the Rambam says that this is in the mitzvah of arei miklat, huaymer. Unet af b'parshas shoftim. Why doesn't he say that it's in parshas shoftim? Al derech wie sagt frier b'parshas bilam. Similar to what the Rambam says, parshas bilam. Why doesn't he say here as well, parshas shoftim? Instead, the Rambam points out specifically which mitzvah it's speaking about, the mitzvah of arei miklat. Continuing further, the Rebbe asks, there's many questions here, all the way until about Siftes. The Rebbe continues and asks as follows. Euch darfen verstehen dem Diuk Kaloshen b'shnei ha-Mashiachim. Also, we need to understand the precise wording that the Rambam uses when he says that there are Shnei ha-Mashiachim, the 2 Mashiachim. Was ist da negeya? Und in was ist dafke nar David angerufen Mashiach? How and why is it relevant over here to know this title that David HaMelech is referred to as Mashiach? And why is he referred to with this title as Mashiach? So besides the question that we asked before in the Arichas of the Rambam, why is he even bringing up David HaMelech? Why is it relevant to know that there was one Mashiach and there's another Mashiach? But the very title itself, why is it relevant to know that David HaMelech has this title as a Mashiach? Warum? Kishein wie David is nimshach geworden b'shemen ha-mishcha bekeren und wird dann gerufen Mashiach Hashem. So the question over here is, just like David HaMelech was anointed with the shemen ha-mishcha, with a keren, with a horn that is, und wird dann gerufen Mashiach Hashem, and is referred to as Mashiach Hashem. Azoyech lefnei ze is Shaul nimshach geworden bepach und euch wird dann gerufen Mashiach Hashem. Shaul HaMelech similarly was also anointed with of jog, not from the Keren, and he's also referred to as Mashiach Hashem. So why is it that specifically David HaMelech is referred to with this title of Mashiach? Oy boys to teilen zwei Mashiach Yisrael berishaina bachreina. Now if the Rambam is bringing up 2 Mashiachim, 2 unique individuals in history that came and saved Yidden, wat lecheire mehr Massen gewen, Moshe Rabbeinu als Geil Rishon und Mashiach als Geil Achren. If you're looking for 2 personalities that are doing things that are very similar to come and save and take Yidden out of Galos, so why don't we begin with the first, Moshe Rabbeinu, and then the last, Mashiach. Beide haben Mashiach given Migalos. Mashen King David. Both are redeeming from Galos. On the other hand, David not. So why are we bringing David together with Mashiach? Ulahoir, and another point where Mashiach is more similar to Moshe Rabbeinu and not to David. As euch benegeh madregasim benevuah sagt der Rambam. Also regarding their level of nevuah, the Rambam says, as Mashiach is gadol mikol hanavim. Mashiach is greater than all other prophets. Odavi sagt in Sefer Hayad, v'navi gadol hu karev leMoshe Rabbeinu. That he's a great prophet, very close to Moshe Rabbeinu. So the Rambam is comparing him to Moshe. Mashenkin David, He doesn't compare him to David HaMelech. So why is the Rambam putting the two together? Shnei HaMashiachim, David HaMelech and Mashiach. That man das verstehen, durch Masbe sein, Kame de Yukim, und die zwei weite de Galachis, und Hilchas Malachim dort. So let's continue on with the next halachas. We went through halacha Aleph, halacha Beis, and now we can carry on to halacha Gimel. And halacha Gimel sagt der Rambam, Va'al yalal daitcho, it should not enter into your mind. Shah melech ha-Mashiach tzarech lases oises u'moifsim, that Mashiach has to perform wonders and miracles. U'mechadish dvarim ba'ilam, and to innovate new things in the world. Oy mechayim meisim, or to bring tchias ha-meisim, v'chayetze b'dvarim eila, or anything similar. Ein adava kach, that's not the way it is. Shaharei Rabbi Akiva chulu, because Rabbi Akiva, and he continues there, v'ya bringt dort die Raya from Ben Kasiba, the Raya that Rabbi Akiva said that Ben Kasiba is Mashiach, and he didn't demand of him any wonder or miracle. They did not require of him to show any wonder or miracle. And then the Rambam says, V'ikir hadvarim kochahen. The fundamental point is as follows. Sha'teira hazais chukeha u'mishpateha le'elam u'le'el me'elamim. This Torah and all of its mitzvahs is forever and ever. Ve'ein me'sifin aleim v'loy geirin mehem. You cannot add or subtract from the mitzvahs of the Torah. Anyone that adds or subtracts, or you take the psukim and the mitzvahs of the Torah out of its context, this is definitely a fraud in our apikaitis, and he's a Rasha and he's not Mashiach. This is the Rambam in Halacha Gimel. So now the Rebbe points out as follows. Von dem, was in Hemshach HaHalacha wegen Melech HaMashiach is the Rambam Messiah. So the Rambam here is talking about Mashiach himself. How do we know that this is Mashiach? And he concludes, V'ikir sha'teira azayis chukei mishpatei lo'elam chulu. And the main fundamental point is that Torah and mitzvahs are forever. Is l'chayra mashma, it seems, as when ein is sagt, as Mashiach wird davon machen, if someone will come and say that Mashiach has to perform miracles, or the mechadish ein dvarim ba'olam, or bring or innovate new things in the world, is it a mit meisif or gereya b'teira? With this, he's adding or subtracting from Torah, opposite of the way it's supposed to be, that Torah is the same forever. So these two are sort of linked. If you're saying that Mashiach performs miracles, so that's a contradiction to the fundamental belief that there's no additions in Torah. So the obvious question is, what's the kasha from the Beis Din Yonim? How are these two even connected? What's the connection between one claiming that Mashiach has to perform miracles to the fact that the Torah is eternal? They don't seem to be mutually exclusive. Nachmer, Benigei, ya Novi Zok der Rambam, they're in a different place. When the Rambam speaks about a Novi, so there he says, As kol Novi sheyamad lono. Any Novi that will get up v'yoymar and will say, Shashem shlochai, that Eibush sent him, Ein tzarech lases ois ke'echad me'oises Moshe Rabbeinu. He does not have to perform a wonder like those that Moshe did, Oikaises Eliyahu Elisha, or like those that we find by Eliyahu and Elisha, sheyesh b'hem shinim minhagah shel olam, that there's a change in the nature of the world. What's the sign that he's a true prophet? Let him say something about the future in his nevuah, and then we'll see that it'll come to be, and then we'll know that he's a Navi Emes. Zetmans, so what do we see from this? There, the Rambam as well, regarding all Nevi'im, the Rambam negates the concept that a Navi has to make a miracle. Von deswegen führt dort nicht aus, wie beniden die dann, Teira azayis chukei mishpatei lo'elam. But there the Rambam does not conclude, since he doesn't perform miracles, so what's the fundamental idea? That Teira is eternal. Those two don't go together. The Rambam doesn't say that conclusion. Uleidach sagt dort, as darf weisen an ois, sheyem dvarim hasidim. On the other hand, there when it comes to a Navi, the Rambam does say that he does have to say a nevuah about the future to see if it'll come to pass. And that's not the case by Mashiach. So what's the difference? Why over here when we talk about Mashiach and we say that he doesn't have to perform a miracle, the follow-up to that is, however, the Torah is eternal. What's the connection? Carrying on in the Rambam, in the Halacha Shel Achri and Hilchas Malachim is the Rambam Mamshech. So in Halacha Daled, the Rambam continues, V'im Yamoid Melech mi Beis David. If a king from the house of David will stand up, learning Torah, v'oisig b'mitzvahs ke David Aviv, and occupied in doing mitzvahs like David his father. The way it's written in Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh. And he will force all Yidden to go in its ways, the lachazik bitka, and to strengthen any of weaknesses that there are in the commitment to Torah. The yilcham l'chemes Hashem, and will fight the wars of the Eibishter. Harei zeh b'cheskas shehu Mashiach. He has an assumption of being Mashiach, a chazaka of being Mashiach. Then, im Oster v'hitzliach, if he continues to do and is successful, v'notzach kolomish esvivav, and he's victorious over all the nations around him, ubana mikdash b'mkeima, and he builds the base of mikdash in its place, v'kibetz nitche Yisrael, and he gathers in all the Yidden Teretz Yisrael, hareze Mashiach bevadai, so then he's certainly Mashiach, v'yisakin es ha'olam chulu, and he'll come to rectify everything in the entire world. Darfen verstehen, so the question here is, so the Rambam here is qualifying, he's telling us the qualities of Mashiach. Favos der Mond nicht der Rambam da, und euch nicht in dem ganzen Perek, die Meiles Hagdeiles mit welchem is mitayr dem Melech HaMashiach. Why does the Rambam not bring any of the other description and the great levels that it says about Mashiach? Und wie der Rambam allein sagt, b'mokemacher in Sefer Hayad. And as the Rambam himself says elsewhere in Sefer Hayad, Bal Chochme Yiyeh Yesem Shleime, that it'll be more wise than Shlomo HaMelech. V'novi gadlu karav l'Moshe Rabbeinu kanal seif sifei. As we mentioned before, that it'll be a novi close to Moshe Rabbeinu. So here, when the Rambam speaks about the qualities of Mashiach, he doesn't mention any of this. Why not? So finally, to come to the explanation of all these questions in Halacha Aleph, Beis, and Gimel, and Daled, the Rebbe says the explanation is as follows. But first, still one more general question regarding Hilchas Malachim. Behaktim, was der Rambam hat reingestellt, Hilches Malachim Mulchamis oi Mulchamis Besim v'Seif Sifrei Hayad. Let's look at the fact that the Rambam places Hilches Malachim at the end of the entire Sefer Hayad of the Rambam. The L'chaire, seemingly, Lefi Seder Azmanim, wie der Rambam sagt in Onef von Hilches Malachim. According to the order of how things happened when Yidden enter into Eretz Yisrael, as the Rambam himself says in the beginning of Hilches Malachim, Shalosh mitzvahs nitztavi Yisrael b'shas knisas l'Aretz. There were 3 mitzvahs that Yidden are commanded when they enter into the land. Lamanis lemelech chulu. The first is to appoint a king, and then lahachar zarish shel Amalek, to wipe out the descendants of Amalek, and then v'livnes beis abchira, and then to build a beis hamikdash. Hat die Hilches Malachim gedacht stellen bei Sifrei Asach Frie? So if so, Hilches Malachim belongs somewhere in the Sefer Hayad much earlier on, before Sefer Aveda, where there's the halachis regarding building the Beis HaMikdash. Somewhere much earlier. Why does Hilches Malachim come all the way at the end of Sefer Hayad, of the Rambam? V'yesh loymar, so here comes the fundamental point. Mit dem, was the Rambam stellt, das in Siyum Sifrei Hayad, with this that the Rambam places Hilchas Malachim at the end as a conclusion of the entire Sefer Hayad, the Sefer von Halachas, the Sefer where he combines all of the Halachas of Torah, is a demit madgish, as the Shleimus von Kiyum ha-Torah v'ha-Halacha vert b'shas es is da der Inyan HaMalachim. What is the conclusion and the fulfillment, the end of all of Sefer Rambam, including all mitzvahs and halachas of the Torah? That's Malachim. Malachim is the conclusion and fulfillment of all of the halachas of the Torah. Why is that? Why is it dependent on Hilchas Malachim and having a king to be able to fulfill all the halachas of the Torah? So first the Rebbe says, this is something that's very simply understood. As the Shleimus HaKiyum von alle mitzvahs v'halachas ha-Torah is b'shas is da amelech HaKol Yisrael. When is it possible to have the full fulfillment of all mitzvahs in the Torah? Is when you have a king for Yidden. Through the king, he's the one that fights the wars for the Yidden, to wipe out Amalek. Und die mitzvah livnes beis abchire, and the mitzvah of building the beis hamikdash. Was nar demalt is shayech der kiyum von alle halachas and mitzvahs ha-Torah. Only then is it possible to fulfill all the mitzvahs of the Torah in Eretz Yisrael, and all the Yidden are together in Eretz Yisrael, and you have a beis hamikdash. Many of the mitzvahs that we can't fulfill today is because we don't have a king. We don't have the government, a Yiddish government, a king, which brings together all Yidden in Eretz Yisrael, and which builds a Beis HaMikdash, where so many of the mitzvahs of the Torah are in the Karbanis in the Beis HaMikdash, and the mitzvahs that are in the land in Eretz Yisrael. So the Melech, Hilchas Malachim, is the conclusion and the Shleimos of all of the halachas of the Torah. Bepayel hat sich das aufgetan al yedei David HaMelech. So in actuality, the first time this was fulfilled and this came to be through David HaMelech. Was is given Melech al Kol Yisrael, Yisrael v'Yehuda. He was a king on all of Klal Yisrael, all of the Shvatim, the 10 Shvatim and the other 2 Shvatim. Had Kovish given Eretz Yisrael, he conquered all of Eretz Yisrael, Gemar v'shleimus from Mulchamis, he completed all the wars against all the nations around Vashem and Niach Loi Misaviv, Mikol Leivov, Val Yadoi hat sich angefangen, die Achanes Akalpana von Bein Beis HaMikdash B'Yerushalayim, Vayeme David Zeo Beis Hashem, and through him began the preparations of building the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. Obemela hat gekent sein, the Kiyum HaTeire v'HaMitzvahs B'Shleimus. And through him, it was possible to have all the Torah mitzvahs to be fulfilled b'shleimus. So this is what's unique about David HaMelech. Going back to the question that the Rebbe asked before, that it seems like Moshe Rabbeinu is more compared to Mashiach. So of course, Moshe Rabbeinu redeemed the Yidden from Golus. However, who is the one that brings Yidden to a situation where they have the opportunity to fulfill all mitzvahs HaTorah b'shleimus? That's David HaMelech. In Eretz Yisrael, finally fully conquering the land and preparing the last steps to build a Beis HaMikdash, that is what David HaMelech brings to Yidden, the shleimus of being able to fulfill all mitzvahs HaTorah. The halachas from Mashiach hat der Rambam areingestellt bis Siyum Sifrei Ayat. So now in Hilchas Malachim itself, the Rambam puts in the halachas of Mashiach all the way at the conclusion of Sefer Ayat, B'Seif Hilchas Malachim u'Mulcham Eseim, at the conclusion of the halachas of Hilchas Malachim. Varum das is gidroi v'inyanoi shel Mashiach al pi halacha. With this, the Rambam is showing us how do we define what Mashiach is al pi halacha. The Rambam is mefarish and Perek Yudalef and Hilchas Malachim nit blois the chiyuv from Bias and Mashiach and the chiyuv lahamim by. The Rambam in this Perek is not only telling us about Mashiach and about the obligation that there is to believe in Mashiach. Nor euch, was es is in Yanoi, Gidroi, Upulasai, und Eifenis Galusai. The Rambam wants to tell you what is the point of Mashiach. Al pi halacha. How do we define Mashiach al pi halacha? What are his actions? How is he going to be revealed? The Rambam was telling us al pi halacha what is Mashiach. There's so many things that it says in Medrashim, in Aggadis, in the Gemara, Chazal, about Mashiach. But from all of that, al pi halacha, how do we define what is the purpose of Mashiach? What is Mashiach all about? That's what the Rambam is coming to explain over here in Hilchas Malachim, Perek Yudalef. Mashiach al pi halacha. Ubemele, and was es versteht the chiyuv lahamim by. Once we know what Mashiach is al pi halacha, so when one believes in Mashiach, what is he believing in? He's believing in Mashiach. That's what? What is Mashiach about? Und das meint der Rambam betchilas ha-perek. And this is what the Rambam means when he says in the opening of this Perek of Perek Yudalef, HaMelech HaMashiach asid lamoid v'lahachzer malchus David liyoshna l'memshala rishayna. Mashiach is going to get up and return the kingdom of David HaMelech to its previous kayach, it's the dominion that it had. Ubayna mikdash Mekabetz Nitche Yisrael, to build a Beis HaMikdash and gather all Yidden, the Chayzin Kol HaMishpatav B'Yom Mekashayim Mekaydim, Makrivim Karbanis, including the Karbanis, and Vaisen Shmitten V'Yevlis, Kechol Mitzvasa Amura B'Teira. And all the halachas in the Eretz Yisrael, Shmitte and Yevlis, like it says in the Teira. That's the way the Rambam describes what Mashiach is all about. So what do we see over here? What is the Rambam, from all the Midrashim, from all the Aggadis, what does the Rambam choose to describe? What is the essence of Mashiach al pi halacha? Das ist nicht nur a sippe dvarim was Mashiach wird tun. The Rambam is not simply relating the story of the future of what Mashiach will do. Und was wird sein b'yom, of what will be in his times. No, das ist a halacha. The Rambam here is coming to define for you al pi halacha what is Mashiach. The gather from Mashiach is, the definition of Mashiach is the fact was that is machzer malchus David liyoshna l'memshala l'rishayna. To return, to bring back that place and time and situation that Klal Yisrael has the ability, the opportunity to fulfill all of Torah mitzvahs. That is what Mashiach is. Nit a get oiftan a nayim minyan. Not that Mashiach is coming to innovate and bring something new to Klal Yisrael that they never had before, some other thing outside of Torah chas v'shalom. No, Mashiach is all about one thing, returning and bringing the Yidden to shleimus ha-Torah v'mitzvahs. Was bepoil, now in actuality, how is that accomplished? Kumt das reisen dem, was ubeine Mikdash und Mekabetz Nitche Yisrael, by building the Beis HaMikdash and gathering all Yidden, und b'meile kommt man zu dem Matore und Mechuven from Bias HaMashiach. This brings you to the whole purpose of Mashiach's coming. And the Chayzer Kol HaMishpatim b'yamav kishahayu mikaydim, to return everything to the way it was before. Makrivim karbanis, vaishin shmitten v'yevlis, kachol mitzvasa ha amura b'teira. Like all of the mitzvahs that are written in the Torah. Was das ist verbunden mit Kibbutz Nitchi Yisrael, wenn Kol Yisrael Yeshvim al Admasam. The only time that you have Shmitten and Yevlis in Eretz Yisrael is when all Yidden are on the land. And the only time you can be makriv of all the karbanis is when you have the Beis HaMikdash. So the two details that the Rambam points out of what Mashiach will return, the bringing of all Yidden and the building of the Beis HaMikdash, is for one purpose only, because that enables to fulfill many of the mitzvahs that are dependent on that. So here we see the Rambam is capturing for us specifically what is the essence of Mashiach al pi halacha. This is the conclusion of the entire Sefer Ayah, the Sefer Halachas, all of the halachas of all of Taryag Mitzvah Satayra. The conclusion, in other words, the shleimus of when this will all be fulfilled, is at the time when Mashiach comes. So das heißt, what this means is, die alle in Yonah was haben gefällt in Kiem Teire Mitzvahs, mitzadem was hat gefällt in shleimus kol Yisrael Beis HaMikdash. Everything that was lacking in the ability to fulfill Torah mitzvahs because we're lacking in having all Yidden or having a Beis HaMikdash. But das ist klalis in Yinagolis. In general, this is the time of Golis. Vet nishlam durich Mashiach. Mashiach is the one that will come to fill this in. Mashiach will change that. Und in dem besteht, was Mashiach is machzir malchus David le'yoshna chulu. Mashiach is the one that comes to return. So the Rebbe emphasizes not to innovate anything new, but to return the opportunity that Yidden have, like it was before, to fulfill all Torah mitzvahs. Malchus David le'yoshna chulu v'chayzrim kol ha'mishpatim, everything returns. Bringt zurück the shleimus v'halachas und mitzvahs HaTorah. That's what Mashiach is all about. The Rebbe adds, This is also relevant la'alacha today, legabi der amuna boy, und in was es darf sein, der mechake lebiyase, our belief in Mashiach, and our awaiting is coming today. What exactly are we waiting for? We balt as das is the gather for Mashiach, and since we now know that this is what defines Mashiach, the person that will come to bring us back shleimus HaTorah v'mitzvahs, darf die Amunah sein, nicht bloß, als wird kommen, bichdei zu auslesen Yidden von Golus. Our belief in Mashiach is not only that we're in exile and there's so many tzaris in Golus, and Mashiach is going to be our Redeemer. That's not the only thing. Nor maimin boy, as is machzer malchus David le'yoshna v'chayzer in kol ha'mishpatim. The belief in Mashiach is also, or maybe primarily, the fact that Mashiach comes and redeems Yidden in order to give them the opportunity to be mekayim all of Torah mitzvahs. That's the essence of Mashiach al pi halacha. Now we can understand, in light of all of this, the halachas where the Rambam brings all the rayas about Mashiach. So the rayas the Rambam is bringing is coming to make this point, to prove this definition that the Rambam points out about what Mashiach is. We can see this here in the psukim of the Torah. Auf dem bringt der Rambam der Reihe von wann weiß man, als Mashiach wird kommen und bringen le shleimus HaTorah lahachzem achzav le yeshna chol v'chayzim kol ha'mishpatim. From where do we know that Mashiach is going to come to bring back the shleimus of Torah and bring back all the mitzvahs of Torah? That is the essence of Mashiach. In other words, the Rambam is not simply coming to prove the source of Mashiach in Torah, but actually the way he defined Mashiach. That this we can see in Torah. Shaharei Torah ida alav cholo. The very fact that Torah testifies about Mashiach and doesn't leave it for the Nevi'im to speak about it later, as many other things that the Nevi'im speak about later. But the Torah itself speaks about Mashiach means because it's relevant to Torah itself. This is the shleimus of Torah. That's what Mashiach is about. Was sind die Rayes, sind da zwei Pratim. So if we look over here at the Rayes that the Rambam brings, there are two different details over here. One is Shanama v'shav Hashem lekecha v'kibetzcha gaimer, that Mashiach will come to gather all Yidden. From dem weiß man, as es wird sein Kibbutz Nitchi Yisrael. So from this we see that Mashiach is going to gather all the captives, to gather all Yidden. So what's the relevance of gathering all Yidden back to Eretz Yisrael? Weil das ist der Matzev, was gibt die Möglichkeit, dass es soll sein, Malchus David und Kol HaMishpatim, to bring back the kingdom of David HaMelech and to fulfill all the mitzvahs, when all Yidden are in Eretz Yisrael. Der Kiyum von Halachas und Mitzvahs HaTorah, was ist battle geworden durch Galus Yisrael, to fulfill all mitzvahs that were annulled when Yidden went into Galus. That's the main point of V'shav Hashem lekechas shvuscha. Not just the redemption and the fact that we're going back to our land, but the opportunity to fulfill the mitzvahs. That's the first raya. And then in continuation, the Rambam says, Af b'parshas Bilam nemar, v'sham niba b'shnei ha'mashiachim, b'mashiach ha'rishon shu David sheshias Yisrael miyad tzareyem, u'b'mashiach ha'achron shoymid mibanav shemashiach Yisrael ba'achreina. So the Rambam here speaks about two Mashiachim. What's the point here? Von dem weiß man, because through this we know, as das was wird sein al yedei Mashiach, what is the essence of what Mashiach is? What is he going to do? Und in Yonesh Mashiach is, lahachzer malchus David liyoshna lememshala rishayna, to return, to bring back the previous kingdom that Yidden had. Mashiach is not this new world, new thing, new world order that he's going to bring about. The whole theme of what Mashiach is to return the Shleimus HaTorah mitzvahs that they had before. Is the Mashiach ha'achrain fun dem harishayna Mashiach harishan shu David. If you refer to him as the second Mashiach, it means that he follows up something that was before him, the first Mashiach, which is David HaMelech. So this is the reason why the Rambam brings Mashiach Rishon, then Mashiach Achrain, not because we're interested in speaking about the past history of David HaMelech, but because this helps us define Mashiach himself. What is Mashiach coming to do? The whole inyan of Mashiach is not about miracles and not about a new world order that he's going to introduce in the world. On the contrary, he's about bringing back that Mashiach Harishain that David HaMelech accomplished. Why is David HaMelech referred to as Mashiach? Because he was the one that brought Yidden to the matzav of Shleimus HaTorah v'mitzvahs. And Mashiach is going to be the final Mashiach that will return what David HaMelech did, the place in Eretz Yisrael with the Beis HaMikdash, Shleimus HaTorah v'mitzvahs. Und Visham hu Aime, and the Rambam brings over there the psukim where it says, as the alle Prativ is an Gewen b'Mashiach Harishain David, all the details that it says about what David HaMelech did, voln sein euch by Mashiach HaAchrein ze Melech HaMashiach, will also be by the final Mashiach, by Melech HaMashiach. Onaybendik von Tchilas es Galusa Memshaltei, starting from the way he will begin to be revealed in the world. He's compared to David HaMelech, bis to the Shleimus, so Mochatz Pasei Moev, until the conclusion of how David HaMelech accomplished fighting off all the enemies. Was Dugmasi b'Mashiach, v'karka kol b'nei sheis, and v'hoya Adam Yeresha ze David, v'hoya Yeresha seya oivav ze HaMelech HaMashiach. So the Rambam is bringing all the psukim and comparing and showing how Mashiach will do the same things as David HaMelech did to prove the definition of Mashiach. The point of Mashiach, that he's going to accomplish exactly what David HaMelech accomplished, to get rid of all enemies, bring Yidden to Eretz Yisrael, build the Beis HaMikdash, so Yidden can fulfill all Torah mitzvahs. Mashiach wird bringen zu Shleimus HaTorah. Warum durch dem, was mir wird potter von Shibud Malchi ist, through the fact that we get rid of any subjugation from any governments. V'adarab, on the contrary, Mashiach is of Zeh Sheilit. Mashiach is himself the one that governs. Vet kenen zayin lasik b'teire u b'mitzvahs kahoigen. We will have the opportunity to learn Torah and do mitzvahs properly. Yiyu pnuyim b'teire v'chachmasa v'leyilam negisum avatel. We'll have nobody, the oppressor, no one that will stop us of learning Torah, as the Rambam says in Hilchos Shuvah. So when we talk about wiping out all the enemies, what's the point of all of this? Just to make the point that Mashiach will come and put Yidden on the top and the rest of the nations of the world will be wiped out? That's not the point. The point is that this will enable Yidden to fulfill Torah mitzvahs b'shleimus. Wie the Rambam is ma'irich b'zeh, as the Rambam speaks about this in Hilchos Shuvah. So all of the details that the Rambam chooses to quote about Mashiach, and he doesn't bring everything. There are so many midrashim about Mashiach, and he omits most of them. The details that the Rambam brings up about Mashiach are those details that are relevant for what Mashiach is about and for what Mashiach is coming to accomplish. The kibbutz nitchei Yisrael, the binding Beis HaMikdash, fighting off all the enemies. These are three details that are relevant to give the Yidden the ability to be Mekayim Torah mitzvahs b'shleimus. So those are the details that the Rambam quotes about Mashiach. Al Pizez, move on based on this, we can understand what the Rambam is maktim. Why the Rambam here says, anyone that doesn't believe or await the coming of Mashiach, he denies not only what the Nevi'im spoke about, but also in Torah Moshe Rabbeinu. The Torah testified about him. Und if them bringt dem Pasuk, V'shav Hashem Elekecha, and danach after Parshas Bilam. So the Rambam doesn't simply quote the sources in Torah for Mashiach, but he actually says, he gives the introduction, that you're denying Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu, not just the Nevi'im. The L'chayre, was negeh kol kach in Rambam b'shayches, to Hilchos Mashiach, why is it so relevant over here? In these halachas of Mashiach, as loy b'shar nevi'im bulvad kefir, ela b'teira v'Moshe Rabbeinu. Exactly how far your kfira goes, how much of a kefir you are. You're not only denying what it says in Nevuah, but also in Teira Moshe Rabbeinu. Therein hot l'chayra shayches in Hilchos Shuvah. This would belong, if you want to know the degree of what level of a kaifer this person is. So the Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva discusses at length the different levels. There is a kaifer, there's a min, there's an apikaitis, and various different things in the emunah that you didn't have. So there, the Rambam can bring up this subject about how far of a kaifer this individual is if he doesn't believe in Mashiach. Why does the Rambam stress that right here in Hilchos Mashiach? No, so the answer is, the mit is the Rambam Madgish. Again, the Rambam is emphasizing the point. As the Rinyan from Melech HaMashiach, what is Mashiach about? Was wird bringen the Shleimus and Hilchos and Mitzvahs HaTorah. He will bring back the fulfillment and the conclusion of everything, where you'll have the ability to fulfill Torah mitzvahs. Is nicht nur a Sach, was ist nisgal geworden al der Neviim. So therefore the Rambam wants to emphasize is therefore this is something that's not only prophesied by the Neviim, so you're denying this additional thing, so to speak, that comes at a later time period through the Neviim, nor das is an Inyan von Torah und Moshe Rabbeinu Gufe. This is integral to Torah, and this is part of Torah and part of what Moshe Rabbeinu himself spoke about. Torah Gufe sagt und is maftiach, as es wird kommen Mashiach und dann wird sein Shleimus HaTorah. Torah itself speaks about this, because this is integral to Torah itself, that when Mashiach comes, then will be the full fulfillment of Shleimus HaTorah. That's where the Rambam is emphasizing that you're a kaifer in Torah and Moshe Rabbeinu itself, not because he's coming to define how much of a kaifer you are, because he wants you to understand that the union of Mashiach is not just some prophecy about a beautiful future that Yidden will have, but this is something that's integral to Torah itself, the Shleimus of Torah mitzvahs. Und der befiert is, and therefore the Rambam concludes and says, "Ve'elu advarim hameforashim b'Torah, hen kailim kol advarim shenemra de kol hanavim." What it says here in the Torah includes all the prophecies that it says later about Mashiach and the Neviim. As alle inyanim shenemra de kol hanavim v'gem Mashiachin is an inyan in Torah gufa. All those details that it says, ultimately, it all ties back in to what Mashiach is about, which is an Inyan in Torah Gufa in Shleimus Kiyum HaTorah VaMitzvahs, to bring the time period where there'll be the full fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs. So that explains why the Rambam brings up connecting the Shnei HaMashiachim, David HaMelech and Mashiach, to make this point, to define what the essence of Mashiach is, al pi halacha. Das ist echt der Tam, was der Reihe von Ori Miklot hat der Rambam gestellt als Halacha b'fnei atzma. So now we'll understand why the Rambam brings it yet another proof, and he brings it from Ir Miklot, and he puts it in a different halacha. Why is that? Because here there's a much stronger Reihe. Here we have a Reihe from the very mitzvah itself. Warum von dem bringt der Rambam nicht nur a Reihe, as es mefurish b'Torah, as wird sein durch Melech HaMashiach, des man von Shleimus, in Kiyum HaTorah mitzvahs. The Rambam is not only proving to you about the fact that we see in Torah that Mashiach will come and bring back everything needed in order to give Yidden the opportunity to fulfill Torah mitzvahs b'Shleimus, nor as megefind b'orei miklot. You find regarding a specific mitzvah. That's why the Rambam points out orei miklot, that there is a mitzvah here, as vet zukommen in der mitzvah gufa. This very mitzvah itself will come to its shleimus. There'll be something added to a mitzvah. The Eibishter had commanded this, and this was never fulfilled. And this very mitzvah itself, there's going to be another added to this mitzvah itself. So it's not only like all other mitzvahs that we had in the past, and now because of the matzav of Golus, we don't have the opportunity to fulfill them. The very tzivah itself, the very mitzvah itself, was never fulfilled before, and Yarchiv will bring us the opportunity to fulfill this mitzvah that was never done before. Das heißt, as Teire Gufe sagt, as darf erst kommen as man, wenn es wird sein, die mitzvahs hat Teire kideboy, a time period when the very mitzvahs of Teire itself, not only the opportunity of fulfilling mitzvahs at Torah, but a time period where there'll be the Yarcha of Ayle Kechas Gevulcha, and the mitzvahs of the Torah itself will be to its fullest extent. Kidaboy. That's the additional raya that the Rambam brings in a separate halacha, pointing out Ir Miklot, the addition of this mitzvah. So now the Rebbe continues going on to halacha gimel. Al pikol and alles move on was the Rambam sagt in halacha gimel. Val yal al dait chasham melech HaMashiach tzarech lasses eises and meivsim and mechadish dvarim ba'ilom and mechayim meisim mechayitsim b'dvarim eilo ein adava kach. So the Rambam tells us, do not think that Mashiach is coming to perform miracles or anything the like. That's not the case. Was the mit is a Sheilul zwei Inyanim. So if you look closely, the Rambam is negating 2 points. Nit das is von Inyanim Mashiach. Last is Eises and Meifsim and Mechadish Dvarim Ba'olam. Number one, that's not the purpose of Mashiach, to bring miracles into the world. Und nit das is the Bechine of Amitasai. And this is not also the test for knowing that he's a genuine Mashiach. Und his Messiah, the Rambam concludes, V'ikar advarim kocha hein, sha'teira azais, chukea mishpatel la'elam ala'elam e'elamim. The main fundamental point is that Torah is eternal and forever. So what's the connection of the 2 points? That Mashiach doesn't perform miracles and that Torah is eternal. So the answer is, V'bal shahanal, gidrei v'inyanis shal Mashiach. So since, as we have explained, what is the definition and objective of Mashiach? Shleimus from kiyum halachos and mitzvahs HaTorah. To bring back a time period to be able to fulfill all mitzvahs of Torah fully. Is oips is oil al adas. If one thinks to himself, Sham melech HaMashiach tzarech lasses eisis and meifsim and mechadish dvarim ba'olam. If your approach is that what is the essence of Mashiach? A person that will come to innovate and bring into the world a new world order, new miracles. So peilen ashinuyim welt. The focus of Mashiach is to bring change. Is das bestire zu dem was a Torah azais chukea mishpatel la'olam. This stands in stark contrast to what Mashiach is really all about, which is that everything will remain as is, but he will introduce in the world a situation where those Torah mitzvahs that were there before will now be able to be fulfilled and be fulfilled forever and ever without any change. So the whole concept of Mashiach is the opposite, to return what was before and to give us the opportunity to continue fulfilling Torah mitzvahs forever. Und wie bald das Gidrei von Inyanim von Mashiach is nit eises and meifsim v'chidish dvarim ba'olam. So the whole concept of Mashiach is not about miracles, not about anything new in the world. Is muvanayich as nit das is the bechin of amitasai. And that itself is the reason why this is not the test to see if he's genuine, if this is really Mashiach. As the Rebbe will now explain, the way you test a Navi is you test him by what Nevuah itself is about. The way you test Mashiach is by what the theme and purpose of Mashiach himself is about. So, punkt via Navi, just like it is regarding a Navi. Was the beginning of Amitasai. How do we test to see if he's a true Navi? Ha'ois shalait. So the sign is sheyem dvarim masidim liyas bailam. Let him say things of the future that will be. V'yamnu dvarim, and let it come to pass, and then we'll know it's a Navi. As was quoted earlier. Das heißt, the beginning of Amitasai is the mit was es is in Yanai Navi. We are going to test a Navi to see if he's a true Navi by what the Navi himself is about. He's a prophet that speaks the future. So therefore we test him by this itself. Zog divrei asidis. So derech says moving benegei Mashiach, and so similar it's understood regarding Mashiach himself. How do we look and see if this is a true Mashiach? Yes, it's true, he will be a great prophet. He'll be a Navi as very close to Moshe Rabbeinu. However, what defines Mashiach? What's the purpose of Mashiach? Melech HaMashiach kanal. He's a king. And he's a king to bring back the opportunity of Shleimus HaTorah VaMitzvahs. So the Nevuah does not define him. Ubemeiles move on, halacha daled, as the beginne on the simen of Hamitasai is oibin yonei ba'atzmai is Torah v'kiyuma. So the test to see if this is a real Mashiach is not by looking at all the other qualifications that the Rambam brings in other places, but over here the Rambam is only bringing those things that are relevant for the essence of what Mashiach is. And so therefore the test for Mashiach is Torah and its fulfillment of Torah. That's what Mashiach is all about. V'myamed melech mi beis David, hoige b'Torah of mitzvahs, hoige b'Torah that is, v'aisig b'mitzvahs. That he's going to learn Torah and fulfill mitzvahs. Kfi Torah shebiksav v'shebal peh. Like it says in Torah shebiksav and bal peh. Und peilt die Shleimus von Kiyum am mitzvahs by Yidden, and he brings about the Shleimus of mitzvahs by all Yidden. V'yachav ka Yisrael leilech ba ulachazik bitka v'yilcham l'chamas Hashem, to follow in the ways and to fight the wars, as we explained before, that the wars that he has to fight is all for the purpose in order to bring to the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs. Was yilcham l'chamas Hashem is oicha prat in dem behengen zu Shleimus Kiyum at Torah kanal. Arabnem and dem neuges mevatel mitzad yumas, to take off from Yidden the oppressor and those that are not allowing Yidden to fulfill mitzvahs. So now this is, however, only the first stage of Mashiach. Das bringt aber noch zu wissen, Mashiach, that we assume that he has the chazak of being Mashiach. The Shah said the fear aber zu the Shleimus von Kiyum HaTorah Mitzvahs B'Poil. When Mashiach will come and fulfill Torah Mitzvahs B'Poil, im Oster v'Yitzliach, v'notzach kol ha'omis shesviva v'obana mikdash b'mkaima, v'kibitz nitchi Yisrael. He was victorious, and he built the Beis HaMikdash, and he gathered all the Yidden. Demol dafke hareza Mashiach bevadai. That's when we know that he's certainly Mashiach. Why? Varom demol chayzerin kol ha'mishpatim kechol ha'mitzvahs ha'mamurah b'Torah. The Shleimos and Hilchas V'kiyam HaMitzvahs B'Poil. The reason why this makes him Mashiach Vadai is not only because of he did amazing things, amazing success that he brought about, but it's those details that the Rambam chooses, the three details of being victorious on all the nations, building the Beis HaMikdash, and gathering all the Yidden, that enable the actual fulfillment of Torah and Mitzvahs. And therefore, this is the gather of Mashiach Vadai. Over here in the next ice, in Ice Yudalid, in some of the krachim of Lekutei Sichos, and some of the prints, there's a little bit erased over here. The krach that I was learning before is also erased. The krach that I'm learning now from is also erased. I'm just going to grab another krach of Lekutei Sichos. Hopefully it'll have it without being erased. So let's continue. Okay, Sif Yudalit. V'yesh l'haisav b'zeh. We could add another point to this. In the continuation of the Rambam, and here the Rebbe will explain specifically the four different parts of the psukim that the Rambam brings, both regarding Mashiach and regarding David HaMelech. As die Yeshlohaisav b'zeh, as die Rayas, was the Rambam bringt früher, seine nicht nur auf Klolos Advarim betchilas HaPerik. The rayas that the Rambam brings is not only regarding the general idea brought in the beginning of the Perek, which is as HaMelech HaMashiach Asad Lamoid V'lahachse Malchus David L'Yoshna L'Memshala Rishayna K'chol HaMitzvasa Amurah B'Teira, that Mashiach will come back and bring Teira and Mitzvahs, the general concept of Mashiach, Shleimus HaTeira and Mitzvahs, not oich of the Pratim von Halacha Dalet. The Rambam brings psukim that will also point out the details about Mashiach that he says on Halacha Dalet. Und der Rebbe bringt der Rambam euch in der Reihe von Parshas Bilam, was niba b'shnei Mashiachim, David and Mashiach. And therefore the Rambam brings the psukim where it speaks about both Mashiachim, David and Mashiach, the vier pratim und inyanim in his galas from Mashiachim. So he brings four different details of the psukim about Mashiach and his revelation. Wie steht mefurish v'sham niba, as das is the hemshech lahachze malchus David le'yashna. These are four details, all relevant for bringing fully back the kingdom of David HaMelech. What are these four details? B'chlalus teilen sich das in drei chalukas. So generally, it's divided into three different things about Mashiach. Aleph, David and Mashiach atzmam. Number one, David and Mashiach themselves. Then, for themselves, who they are as a person and what they will be doing for themselves. Beis, another thing, Zeir Pu'ula and Malchus of Yidden, their effect and their kingdom upon Yidden. Gimel, the third point, Zer Pu'ule und Meluche auf Umisa Eilam auf der Welt Bechlal. And then, their actions and their effect and their kingdom over the world and all Goyim in general. Und in dem dritten Inyan, Gufe, sind dort zwei Zmanim wie in Yanim Kedle Kaman. And then in this final thing, about the Goyim and their Meluche over the world in general, there are two different time periods, as will be explained. So the Rebbe now will show us and point out all the details as we can see it, how the Rambam brings these psukim, not just like a Rashi al Teire, but the Rambam is bringing everything which will line up to what the Rambam himself speaks about regarding who Mashiach is and what he does. In Yonam Ba'atzmam. So first, regarding the personalities of David HaMelech and Melech HaMashiach themselves. Yamid Melech mi beis David, haigi b'teire v'isig b'mitzvahs ke David David, k'vi teire shebiksav v'shebal peh. That there's a king that gets up, and what does he do? He learns Teire and fulfills mitzvahs and Teire shebiksav and Teire shebal peh. That's who they are. Und das ist mefurish b'teire, ar enu zen im, v'layata zed David, asherenu zen im, v'lay karav zen Melech HaMashiach. In the first nevuah of Bilam, he sees him, he sees the person, David and then Mashiach. The nevuah of David and Mashiach atzmam, this is the nevuah about them themselves, a king, David HaMelech and Melech HaMashiach. Beis, the second point about Mashiach is v'yachiv kol Yisrael leilach ba l'chazik bitka, the fact that he will come to bring all Yidden to fulfill Torah mitzvahs, zei pu'ula o malchus of Yidden, their effect and kingdom over Yidden. But that's in hemshech hakasiv, that's a continuation which the Rambam quotes, dorach koichav mi Yaakov ze David v'kom shevet mi Yisrael ze Melech HaMashiach. This is the star that will shoot out from Yaakov on Yidden, And the leader that comes over Yidden. Was das weist of the Sheiches zu Yidden, Koichav mi Yaakov, Shevet mi Yisrael. This is the effect and the power that Mashiach will have over the Yidden. And here the Rebbe points out, und in dem sagt man euch die Schleimus, in dem sagt man, that is, euch die Schleimus in Yisrael von Melech HaMashiach, Mashiach Achron, and Legabe Mashiach Harishan. If you pay attention here, you can see the advantage that there is in Melech HaMashiach, the Mashiach Achron, over David HaMelech, the Mashiach Harishan. If David sagt the Lashon Aleph Koicha. First of all, he refers to David HaMelech only as a star. Was weiß, der Fazav, was is Merumim and Menusa von andere Bnei Adam. He's removed, he's higher, he's exalted of other people. This is moving from Rambam and Egei Kechavim Kipshutam, as the Rambam writes in Hilchas Yesei Torah about stars, that Kol HaKechavim v'Agalgalim Kulam Bali Nefesh v'Deya v'Haskel Heim Chulu. They all have a nefesh and very wise and so on. V'Das HaKechavim v'Gedoyla Midas Bnei Adam. Their das, their knowledge is greater than human beings. So Kechavim shows on someone that's very high. But Beis, also Yaakov. Here, the name that it mentions of Yidden is Yaakov. Was weist of Yidden nicht wie sie sind betachlas amayla. The name Yaakov is not Yidden on their highest level. Aber when it gets to Mashiach and Zokter, regarding Mashiach it says, Aleph, it comes Shevet. There will be a Shevet, a leader. Was Pirusha Kipshutai, Melech Reide U'Moshel, a king which is a leader. Was das is begoli by Mashiach. This will be revealed by Mashiach. V'yachav kol Yisrael leilech ba'al l'chazek bitko. So not that he's higher and removed, but he'll be a leader over Yidden. And Beis mi Yisrael. The term used here is Yisrael, which is Shem HaMayla for Yidden. The name that shows on the high level of Yidden. So therefore we can see here that Mashiach is similar to David HaMelech, but on a higher level. Gimel, now the third detail of what Mashiach and David did. V'yilcham l'chemes Hashem im osav etzliach v'natzach kol ha'omis shesvivav. Fighting the wars like David HaMelech did and like Mashiach will do. Steht in Pasuk. So that's in the next psukim that the Rambam quotes. Umachatz pasim moyav zed David v'cheinu oime v'yachas moyav v'yemadem v'chevel v'karka kol b'neshei zeh HaMelech HaMashiach shenema b'yam moshlim yom ad yom, referring to the fights and the wars against all the nations of the world to wipe them all out. Was euch in them is mudgish the Meile from Melech HaMashiach. And here as well, if we pay attention, we can see that there's an advantage to Mashiach. By David is not Aleph Mochatz, will crush them. In Beis it says Pasei Moyev, the extremities of Moyev. And by Mashiach in V'karker, completely get rid of them, completely destroy them, undermine them. And Beis Kol B'nei Sheis, all of the descendants of Sheis, which means all of the Goyim. The shlita of alle ummos. It doesn't really mean to wipe out, but as the Rabbi here points out, it means shlita, to rule over all of the nations. So therefore, it's much more powerful by Mashiach. Adavid lashon in Nevi'im, by David, and it says vayach es Moav. He will hit. He will only vayach, and only Moav. And by Mashiach in Aleph from Mashloi and Beis miyam ad yom. He will rule from one sea to another sea over all the nations. So this is the third thing of Mashiach and David, their activity and their effect and their kingdom over all the nations of the world. But then in this itself comes the final stage, Dalid, v'yisakenes olam kulei lavedes Hashem b'yachad. The entire world will all be rectified, and everyone will come to serve the Eibishter Shenema, Kiyaz Epach Alamim Safa Bruda Likre Kulam B'Shem Hashem Alavde Shchem Echad. Everyone will call the name of Hashem and all serve Hashem. Steht in Pasuk. So this is in the following psukim that the Rambam brings. V'hoy Adam Yereisha Zed David Shenema V'ati Adam La David La'avadim V'gaymer, and V'hoy Yereisha Seir Oivav Zeh Melech HaMashiach Shenema V'olam Mashiyim B'Artziyim V'gaymer. The final full inheritance of Mashiach, that the whole world will come around and come to serve the Eibishter. That's the final stage of the effect of Mashiach on the world and all the Goyim in general. Was euch does move on. The Maila from Mashiach, and then here as well we can see the advantage that Mashiach has over David. Benegele David sagt man, v'hoye Edom Yereisha, that Edom will be an inheritance. Was das direkt zechais in them was vatihi Edom leDavid la'avadim, and he brings the pasuk that it says that they all became servants. Und benegele Mashiach, v'hoye Yereisha seir oivav, nit nur die Anshia ir, not only the people of the city but all the enemies. Und wie sagt im pasuk v'olam mishim b'artziyim lishpates hareisa v'siyumoi v'oisa lahavaya hamalucha. The entire mountain of Esav, everybody will be under the kingdom of the Eibishter. So there's an advantage to Mashiach. So these are the four different details of what Mashiach accomplishes. Corresponding to this, the Rambam brings the four different parts of the psukim in Parshas Bilam. So the Rambam is not just quoting them as a Rashi, but the Rambam is actually bringing them to prove what Mashiach is about and what Mashiach will accomplish. The Rabbi concludes that Oif 2, in dem vierten Inyan, legabe, dem dritten Inyan, in Yunchel Mechemes Hashem, und Nitzachan Omais. So what is exactly the additional accomplishment of the fourth stage of Yilchem Mechemes Hashem, and actually defeating all the nations, and having the full dominion from one sea to another sea over the previous stage where he fights? Right, so there's the there's the dritte inyan actually, which is Yilchem Mechemes Hashem, and then there's the fourth inyan, which is Nitzachan Umais. So how do we define the difference between them? Is move on from the L'shainis Gufe Mashloi and Yerusha. So this could be understood from the very expressions that we see in the pasuk. One is Mashloi, that will rule over the nations, and the other is Yeresha, that will be an inheritance. What's the difference? The Yilchem and the Yisakin Asylum, or the way that Rambam puts it, one is to fight the wars against them, and the other one is to rectify. So what's the difference? Bedugmas the Chiddush from Yerusha of Kibush. This could be understood in what's the greater accomplishment in a Yerusha and an inheritance more than conquering. Und wir gefunden bin Gei Eretz Yisrael, die beiden Yanim, als sie haben das genommen al Yidei Kibush, und euch gehat bei Yerusha. They even conquered the territory of Eretz Yisrael, and they also received it as an inheritance from their ancestors. So the difference is as follows. The reign of Mulchama and Nitzachim, Kibush, Mulchama, when you fight and you're victorious and you conquer through a war, is boifen from Karker, Mashle. You're ruling auf Shlita. Heipich the Metzias Veratzen von dem, was man is Kaivish. This is going against the will of the one that you conquer. You're against his will, ruling over him. That's the concept of rulership. That's the first stage. But then when we speak about the inheritance, that the entire mountain of Esav will become an inheritance, is Adarabah. What is the concept of inheritance? The concept of inheritance is that I inherit something that comes to me, that's something that's close to me, mine. Nicht as man is kaivish v'sheilat auf a zweiten, not ruling and governing over another. They come around to actually be yours willingly. Derech says, move on, the chiddush from v'yisaken es oilam kuloi laved es Hashem biyachad. So we could also understand now what's the new level that comes through rectifying and bringing everyone together. Oif v'yilchem mulchemes Hashem v'natzach kalom eshisvivov. Much more than fighting and defeating all the nations. Azei gufar nekenen the emes from Malchusay from Melech HaMashiach. In the final stage of Mashiach, all nations of the world will come around to recognize and see the truth of the kingdom of Mashiach. Und wie es ist merum ist mefurish in Siyam Halacha, so it's hinted, and also explicitly in the end of the Halacha, was is nishpat gvarn al dei censer. In most Rambams, the censors took it out. Ukishayamad HaMelech HaMashiach be'emes. And when Mashiach will get up in truth, fully. V'yatzliach, v'yana v'yanasa miyad, and kulam chayzin v'yaydem, shesheka nachla v'sayim, v'sheneviyim v'avisayim hitum. Immediately all the Goyim will come and see that their ancestors lied to them, and all of their religions are garbage and nonsense, and they'll come and see the truth of who Mashiach is. As vet bazei likrei kulam b'shem Hashem olav d'shchem echad. They'll all come around to call out the Eibishter's name and to serve the Eibishter together, all as one. That's the final stage of Mashiach, where the entire world comes around to recognize the greatness of Mashiach. Durch der Amunah Shleima, v'vias HaMashiach, so through the complete faith in the coming of Mashiach, this is al Teira, as we've explained over here according to Teira, that this means believing in Mashiach, what Mashiach is really all about, to bring back the Shleimus HaTeira and Mitzvahs. Und mechake lebiyaseh, to await the time of his coming. Achake lei b'chol yoyim sheyaveh, to await his coming every day. Was Yeshleima, the Rebbe adds an important point there in the parentheses, as in them is eich nichlal de limud and hilchas Mashiach. Part of believing in Mashiach and awaiting his coming includes also learning about this, learning about Mashiach. That das Gufe mekarev und memar sein biyasei, this itself will hasten his coming in an oifen von achishena, in the language that the Gemara says that it will come very quickly, ubekarev mamish, speedily in our days.